Have you ever felt like you spend hours and hours studying only to get average grades? Like you spend 10 hours a day making static notes, reading them and memorizing them, only to reach the exam hall and realize you remember absolutely nothing? Well, dear viewers, do not fret because in this episode of Study Diaries, we are going to uncover 8 study techniques that will help you go from a D to an A in your next exam. Without further ado, let's start this video. Starting with tip number 1, which is to practice active recall. Well, dear viewers, this is the stage where we say bye-bye to our static notes, highlighters, and all passive form of learning, because active recall is a game changer. Instead of passively rereading notes or textbook, you challenge your brain by actively retrieving information from memory. Think of it like this. If you are interested in learning how to cook, you won't make much progress just from reading recipe books or watching cooking videos, right? Going to the kitchen and actively practicing how to cook will be a much faster way of learning rather than just passively watching cooking videos. This concept is the same with studying. If you're studying for a history test, don't just read about the causes of World War II. Close your book and ask yourself, what were the causes? Write down your answers or say them out loud and then check your work. This method works because every time you force your brain to recall information, you are strengthening the neural connections that make it easier to remember later. The more you practice recalling, the less likely you are to forget. Start small. Use flashcards, quiz yourself, or summarize a topic in your own words. It's challenging, but that's the point. Your brain grows stronger with every effort you make. Moving on to tip number 2, which is to practice spaced repetition. Ever feel like the things you study just vanish from your brain after a day or two? That's where spaced repetition comes in. Instead of cramming everything at once, you review the materials at intervals over time. This technique leverages the forgetting curve, which shows that we lose information quickly if we don't revisit it. Here's how it works. Review what you have learned on day 1, then again on day 3, then on day 7, and so on. For example, if you're learning new vocabulary, go over it today, review it again in few days, and then again next week. Use a simple calendar or planner to help you remember when you need to go through this. By spacing out your reviews, you're giving your brain repeated exposure to the material just before you forget it, locking the material into your long-term memory. The next tip is to practice deliberately. If you want to improve, don't just practice. Practice deliberately. Deliberate practice means focusing on the areas where you struggle instead of repeating what you already know. Let's say you're learning how to play the piano and you're great at playing scales, but you always mess up tricky chords. Instead of practicing scales for hours, spend that time working on the chords you find difficult. The same goes for studying. If you're preparing for a math test and always get stuck on algebra, spend extra time breaking down the concept and solving tougher problems. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, you hate it. Yes, it's frustrating, but facing your weaknesses heads on, that's where the magic happens. When you target your weak points, you will see improvement faster than just doing what's easy. Tip number 4 is to teach someone else. Teaching someone else is one of the most underrated study techniques. When you explain a concept, you're not just recalling it, you're organizing your thoughts, simplifying complex ideas, and identifying gaps in your understanding. Imagine you're studying biology and trying to learn photosynthesis. Instead of silently reading your notes, pretend you are teaching to a friend or even a younger sibling. Break it down step by step. For example, plants use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to create glucose and oxygen. The process of teaching forces your brain to fully understand the material because you can't explain what you don't know. This method is so effective that it's often called the Feynman technique, named after the famous physicist who used to learn and teach complex topics. And hey, if you can teach it, you probably understand it better than you think. Tip number 5 is to use multisensory learning. Your brain loves variety, and that's where multisensory learning comes in. This method involves engaging more than one sense, like sight, sound, and touch, when you study. For instance, if you're trying to memorize a diagram of the heart, don't just stare at it, draw it yourself, label the parts, and say their names out loud. Or if you're learning a new language, listen to an audio recording. while writing down the words and practicing their pronunciation. Engaging multiple senses creates stronger memories because your brain forms connection in different areas. It's like creating multiple pathways to the same destination, so the information is easier to retrieve later. The next tip is very, very interesting, which is to gamify your study session. Look, who says studying has to be boring? Gamifying your study sessions can make learning fun and addictive. The idea is simple. Turn your study goals into challenges and reward yourself for completing them. For example, break your study materials into chunks, like finishing one chapter or solving 10 math problems, and then reward yourself with a small treat or a short break. Apps like Kahoot or Quizzes allows you to have fun while quizzing yourself. You can even play this with friends, making the learning experience more fun and interactive. I like to think of it like leveling up in a video game. But instead of unlocking new skins, you're unlocking knowledge. When studying feels like a game, you'll be more motivated to keep going. Tip number 7 is to create a distraction-free environment. Your environment plays a huge role in how productive you are. A cluttered, noisy space filled with distractions like your phone or TV can sabotage your focus. To create a distraction-free environment, find a quiet spot, tidy up your desk, and keep only the essentials nearby. Use apps like Forest to stay off your phone or noise-canceling headphones to block out background noise. If you're someone who thrives on ambience, try adding a study lamp or some calming decor to make the space inviting. Remember, a clear desk leads to a clear mind. And finally, the last and most important tip of them all, which is to get proper sleep. Here's the truth. No amount of studying will stick if you're not getting enough sleep. Sleep is when your brain consolidates memories and processes what you've learned. Skipping sleep to cram might help in the short term, but it's actually hurting your performance in the long run. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night and stick to a consistent schedule. Avoid screens and caffeine before bed to ensure a restful sleep. Think of sleep as your brain's reset button. It clears out mental clutter and prepares you to tackle the next day with full focus. And there you have it, 8 powerful tips to help you learn faster and smarter. Whether it's mastering active recall or creating a game out of your study session or simply getting enough sleep, these strategies can transform the way you learn. Remember, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. And if you would like more tips such as this, or you are struggling with being lazy, I'll suggest to check out this video on the screen. With that, I'll see you there. Goodbye and take care.